Hey everybody, welcome to Leon's Chainsaw Parts and Repair. It's another cold one here in the Pacific Northwest, Southern Oregon specifically. Therefore, I broke out the Elmer Fudd flannel. No, I don't have the hat and the flaps, but the red and black, it's a pretty good look for me, I think. We're going to do an updated video. Well, you already know that. You read the title. Why I still prefer a chain grinder. But there's a lot more nuance to this video. I'm not going to make errors that I made in that last video. Plus, I know more now. I know more because of some of the comments on that video. Some of the folks that made other videos. Okay? Hey, we should all be learning day in and day out. If we aren't, what's the point? What I'm hoping to avoid in this video, though, and it's impossible by human nature, I'm hoping to avoid some of the smart aleck stuff, like, well, you can't, I don't, prefer a chain grinder because that's a long extension cord to get out in the woods. Really? Of course. Nowhere in that video did I say take a chain grinder in the woods. So let's move on from that. Okay, for a refresher course, the one I have is old. Well, it's not that old, but it's a 2007 model, and this was sold by Northern Tool. It's essentially a clone of the Tecumseh, I think I'm pronouncing that right, aka Oregon. Okay, this one has a solid stop screw. Some of the newer, cheaper versions have a plastic stop down here and then a set screw that comes in. I don't like that style. I like this solid stop. This has the tilting chain vise, okay? You can get a 10-degree angle depending on what you're doing with full chisel chain. And we can talk about that later. You got your chain stop, your depth, that's your clamp. Boom, away it goes. Really quite simple. It really is. But there's a learning curve to it. Just like anything, there's a learning curve. So, let's go through, before we do some demonstrations, okay? Let's talk about some of the pros and cons. Now, with chain grinder, one pro is obvious. It's fast, okay? That's good. If you need to do some work very quickly and you're in a shop setting, it's hard to beat this. This is so much faster depending on the situation. It is consistent. You're going to get the same results every time. You set this stop, you pull your chain back against it. Donk, donk. No sideways horse crap. Don't pull on it, don't reef on it, don't pull the chain back harder on one tooth than the other. I mean, there's some common sense in there. But you should get the exact same result. You should have exact same cutter lengths when you get done with this. In theory. Okay? It's accurate. I just said that. Same results. Consistent, accurate. Maybe those should have been one line. I don't know. But when you're doing more than one thing, okay, if you're doing a piece of full chisel chain, square corner like that, round ground, and you need to put that plate angle on it, you're going to get a cutter length that's the same, you're going to get a tilt that's the same, and you're going to get a top plate angle that's the same. And it's doing that for you. Pluses and minuses to that. But it's going to be accurate. It looks nice. Okay, that's a stupid thing. But think about it. If you've got saws in a collection that you're displaying, having a nice, neat looking chain as you photograph that saw for a calendar, for a website, it can matter. Performance in the woods? That doesn't mean squat. What are you trying to get at? Damaged cutters, alright? If you've rocked a chain and you've got damage halfway back the tooth, you're going to be filing with a hand file a long time to get back there. and you're going to probably wear a file out on that one chain. This guy, depending on the type of wheel you have, you may be able to take most of that damage out in 1 to 2 passes, depending on how far back it is. So it's very aggressive in removing damage. Now that can also be a negative. So let's flip over to the negatives of one of these things. It's really fast. Yeah, that's a negative as well, because you can make an error and destroy a lot of tooth really fast. You want to take the time to make sure that you're grinding the right amount. You don't want to take too much tooth off. Take the time to set this up, and that means you take the time to pull the handle down a couple times. Make sure that your wheel is going to land on the tooth where you want it to land, so that you're not taking too much. It's so easy to give this screw an adjustment and take a little more. You can't give it an adjustment and take a little less. So there's a learning curve. You got to learn what all this does. Now it's really quite simple, especially if you've taken the time to understand what it is a chain is doing and what you want to see out of it. Okay, but you don't need to use that tilt on everything. The full chisel chain, that's where you use it. The angles are clearly marked on the front. That's pretty straightforward. You can go by the marks on the top plate. You can go by whatever literature came with it. You can go by your own preference. I mean, to a certain extent, that's kind of what I do. 3/8 chain gets ground at 25 degrees every time. And I don't care if steel recommends 30. I don't run their chain anyway. But that's my personal preference. Low profile 3/8, 325, that's going out to 30. That's just the way I do it. You can do something different. You can change the tilt on the head right here, so that you're going in at a sharper angle or a less sharp angle. Okay. Got to learn kind of what you prefer. Start with factory specs, and then you can experiment if you want to. Or you can say to hell with it, it works, leave it alone. Another negative. Yeah, it's not portable. No, you're not going to put this on the back of your pickup truck with an extension cord and go out in the woods. Now, it's actually pretty funny, since I made that original video, most trucks now have some sort of onboard power. I wonder, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to unbolt this thing, but if I could find the power draw for this, makes you wonder if a 400 watt inverter would actually power one of these. I kind of doubt it, but it's kind of funny. That would be a cute smart aleck answer to a smart aleck answer. So, whatever. There's a lot of really compelling reasons to use one of these things. There's a lot of really compelling reasons to use a hand file. Number one, you're going to get a better finish, a finer finish, okay? No matter how well you dress these wheels, you can always almost always get a finer point with a good file and proper technique. You're going to get a true razor sharp edge on that. And that's just reality. Is the average person going to notice it when they're cutting? I don't know. If you're an enthusiast, probably. File is pretty portable. That fits in your box of chainsaw tools better than that does. That's a given. No question about it. Once you learn filing, it doesn't have to be a pain in the neck. If all you're doing is a touch-up, and you're out in the woods, you don't need to pull your chain off your bar and do anything else. You can just secure the saw somewhere, find a technique that you like, whether it's a stump vise, whether it's Buchan's style where he likes to lean over the saw and hold it down with his chest. I tried that. I don't care for it. It doesn't work for me. But what doesn't work for me might work for you just fine. Little touch up in the woods, that's the way to go. Duh. That just makes sense. Cons of filing. It's also easy to mess up. You mess up over time, though, and that's what gets you, is you don't even see it coming if you're not paying attention. You have a dominant hand, and depending on what hand that is, you're going to have a natural human tendency to file one side of the chain a little more aggressively, and a lot of people tend to wander on the angle. And you get one half where the top plate angle gets to be really sharp or really shallow. Cleaning that up takes a lot of chain off. A hell of a lot of chain. So, hand filing, you can mess a chain up just as effectively as you can on one of these. It just takes you more filings to do it, whereas one, whoa, crap. Okay? Hand filing is slower. If you're just doing a touch-up in the woods, yes, it's faster than pulling the chain off, putting it on here, and getting going. But if you're doing a true-up, repairing damage, I'm sorry, hand filing is going to be slower. It just is. That's a pretty easy thing to see, I think. And I'm sure I'll get some smart aleck or comments on that. You gotta focus when you're hand filing. You gotta focus when you're doing this too, but because of that human tendency to push a little harder or let your angle drift, you've got to really keep an eye on this. Now, once you train yourself to do it, it's no big deal. But how many people are doing this every day? How many are doing it once every month? Every 2 months, you know? The more you do it, the better you get. There's no question about that, but I think a lot of users are casual enough, infrequent enough, that it's easy to not develop the good habits that you need to hand file a chain. One more downside is fatigue. Okay, you say, oh, well, filing a chain, that's just, how... Alright, there's more to it than that. One, yes, filing a large chain, let's say the 32-inch bar or 36-inch bar, you know, one of the... How about that big 60-inch bar that's hanging up there on this? Would you want to hand file that? You'd be tired at the end, I don't care who you are. So again, it depends on what it is you're doing, how much material you have to take off. You're going to fatigue doing that. You might already be tired. You might have been cutting for 5 hours, and you rock a chain, and you need to touch it up to get through the rest of the day, and you're already tired. Tired muscles have less control. Something to be aware of, alright? Just, it's reality. So, I guess Cliff Notes version of that is you should use what's appropriate for your situation. And I know that sounds like a non-answer, but it really isn't. Depending on what you're doing, where you're at, there's going to be a different answer. If you're out cutting firewood and you screw up your chain, you better have a file with you or a spare chain. Okay, I mean, that's another answer. It really is. In fact, I think it's foolish to not go in the woods, at least the way I do things, and not have a chain, because I'm driving 45 minutes, give or take, from here. Okay, and where I'm cutting wood, there is nothing. There is nothing to help me fix a really bad screw-up. So I try to keep a chain for at least 2 of the saws that I'm running, an extra chain, just in case. It's good practice. I've got hand files up the gazoo so that I can fix that. But if I'm here in the garage and I've got one that's all jacked up, that bad boy is going to be my friend. Because at this height, what am I going to do? I'm going to plop my butt down and I'm going to sit right here and work. Pretty straightforward. It's nice. There's a reason I made this stand and set it at that height, because for me and that shop stool, that's money right there. Alright, so one thing to keep in mind if you are going to choose to use a hand grinder is your tooth, when you're done on here, should basically be fitting one of your files if you've got the stone shaped right. Okay. So this is a chain that I ran across the grinder. You can see it's got a fresh edge on it. Right about there. It's pretty close. I'm looking at this through the viewfinder, trying not to get my fingers in the way. And I've got the 10-degree angle just about right. Okay. So this 7/32 file fits in there. So if I've got to dress this in the woods, I'm not going to be taking a bunch of material off by hand to get it to match the profile of the file. So that's, if you're going to mix and match especially, you want to make sure that you've shaped this wheel with the stone. And I didn't pull out the little plastic gauge, but there's a little gauge you can slip over this and make sure it's the right basically profile. And that's kind of where the top plate angle adjustment comes in too. You know, you can mess with that a little bit, but you don't want to mess with it so much that you can't file it back or file it effectively when you're out in the woods. So, what I like to do, and I probably have already said this, it doesn't need repeated, but I will be very clear. Most of my chains will get anywhere from 2 to 4 hand filings, whether it's in the garage, in the vise, because that's really how I like to do it. If I'm going to hand file, I like that stationary spot. If it's out in the woods, I have a little stump vise that you literally just take your axe and hammer it into a stump or a log, and it clamps the tip of the bar. Done. Okay, I get some nice consistent results that way. I'm not a tailgate filer. It doesn't work for me. Don't care for it. If it works for you, perfect. That's one less piece of crap you got to carry around with you. But after that, I will typically throw them on here and true everything up. Now, over the years as I've gotten better at hand filing, the true up is less. Sometimes it really doesn't even need it, but still, that's kind of the routine I like to stay on. Because at that point, I also know it's time to pull that chain and clean up the bar. Because that matters. You've got to get your oil passages cleaned up, you got to get all that stuff going. So, that's one pro to the chain grinder, is you're taking that chain off, you're looking at that bar, and you have no reason not to clean it up right there. Maybe a weak excuse, but it is an excuse, okay? So, no matter what you do, you're going to have to deal with the depth gauges, okay? I'm not going to waste a lot of time going into technique on that. I'm going to show you some of what I use. And because I'm wearing gloves, I can't pick anything up, which is unfortunate. There's a lot of different styles of depth gauges out there, and I'm going to show you some of the more ridiculous, okay, some of the styles that don't work for me. We'll phrase it that way. I won't say they're ridiculous. They all served a purpose, or serve. Oregon, I don't remember if this was called Super Guard or what the heck. This might have been Vanguard. I don't know. I'm sure I got it wrong. Which one's the tooth? Well, that's the tooth, and that is the depth gauge. Okay, this was considered like the ultimate safety chain because it had this wide depth gauge raker, sometimes they're called, and this was supposed to prevent the chain from being too grabby. You know, it was supposed to help reduce kickback. That's been a thing for a long, long time. These chain manufacturers would come up with different schemes, techniques, technology, whatever you want to call it, to try and control kickback. In my personal opinion, the best way you control kickback is by paying attention to what the hell you're doing and don't put yourself in a bad spot to begin with. But chain design can help. Chain sharpness can also help. So this style is going to be really hard to maintain your depth gauges on. You're going to need the older style Oregon that has that super wide slot, because what you're doing is setting it on across all those teeth, and then you file down what's up above. Now this chain I have filed a little bit below. What is this? This is a .025. Okay. I don't like this style. Adjusting those depth gauges is difficult. You have to do a lot more material, and if you're hand filing with that, you're going to spend a lot more time at the vise doing this. I would prefer to avoid that. That's just me. So, Homelite had their Raker 3 chain, which is equally obnoxious to maintain, because it literally has 3 depth gauges or rakers all riveted together right there. So that's going to be the same stinking routine. Set this across and file down what's up above. Now the spec for this chain, this is a brand new chain, looks like it might have been .025, and I don't see a whole hell of a lot sticking up above there. Also, very time consuming to adjust your depth gauges on. We've got a piece of Homelite. I would call this, yeah, this is round ground chain. See how rounded the tooth is there? There's no angle to that at all. Now that has the single gauge. Pretty nice. A lot less to work with. And that's where I like to use, this is a Husqvarna tool. It's similar to the old Carlton Filoplate. Okay, the Carlton Filoplate style. There we go. See that? What sticks up above there is what you file off. Now this is a pretty new chain, and no matter whether I choose the hard or soft setting, I am below that because I have already adjusted these down. When I say hard and soft, those are marked on there. Softwood keeps, or is going to put the depth gauge a little bit lower because your saw isn't working as hard. You can take a little more off. Hardwood setting, it's implying the saw is going to work harder. You don't want to take as big a bite. Might get a little grabby. You can run the hard set or the soft setting in hardwood, but it's going to be a little chattery, possibly. Maybe grab a little bit more. It's fun to play with this stuff, folks. It really is. But you've got to deal with those depth gauges no matter what. And again, a piece of full chisel. This is the kind of Oregon chain I like to run. Just a single depth gauge, super simple to adjust, really easy to maintain. Alright. Couple final thoughts here. Safety chain, is it really safer? I don't know. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an expert on that. What I know about safety chain is it was designed and certified, basically, you know, UL, things like that, to be sold and used by occasional chainsaw users. They felt that tooth designs like this were less likely to cause somebody to become injured while using that chain. We can debate that until we're blue in the face. There are some people, and they may well be right, who say, just the standard old, give me a chain, let me maintain it, let me keep it sharp, and let me be a responsible operator on the saw, and I'm never going to get hurt. And that could well be true. But when you take into account fatigue, you know, after a long day, it's so easy to make a mental error. I don't know. But then, is the average occasional user going to cut for 8 hours straight? Probably not. So, there's a lot of ways all the way around that debate. My personal preference, and this is for me, this is not me recommending it to anybody, but the kind of stuff I do, you guys can look back in the channel at the Firewood Hill videos and see the kind of stuff that I do. I prefer the simplicity of basic chain. And it comes with big damn warnings on there that says this has no anti-kickback features, this is prone to injury. And that's a risk that I personally am willing to accept, knowing my time on a saw and my skill level with it. And I'm not a logger. I'm not saying I'm a logger. One myth that's out there is a chain, and I fell into this with that first video because I like to generalize back then when I thought nobody on YouTube cared what some jerk in his garage in Phoenix, Oregon had to say about this. Most people, what I find is they're not going to take the time to procure these tools, they're not super expensive, and maintain these depth gauges. So the overwhelming opinion in occasional chainsaw users is when you pull that new chain out of the box, drop it on the saw, that's the fastest and the best that it will ever cut, and it will never, ever cut that good again. That is a myth. You have to work to keep it cutting that good. But Buchan's videos clearly show you can have your tooth filed all the way down to that stinking line right there. You barely got nothing left. It's ready to snap the tooth off and it'll still cut. But you've got to be conscious of adjusting those rakers and filing it appropriately, filing it evenly, grinding it evenly, however you're going to do it. Your chain should cut as good the day you throw it away. Well, the morning of the day before you throw it away, because you might rock it that last day. You know what I mean. It should cut good all of its life. It really should. So, yeah, bar maintenance, it matters, okay? You can do all of this stuff right, and if you don't maintain your bars, game over. At bare minimum, flip your bar on a regular basis, okay? This is not a great example because I've ground it, but your rails need to be flat, so I guess it's a great example of that. Okay, if they're tapered off, if the groove is opened up, you got to do something about that, and you don't have to have all the stuff that I've got in here. If you flip your bars on a regular basis, and every once in a while, you can even hand file them flat. I would recommend putting that in a vise and making sure that you're going at it at the right angle, but just some simple stuff. Remove the burrs, okay, and treat this like it is, like something important. Bar look, see all those chips in the rails? There's a dip right there, and then, oh wow, whoops, that got beat to snot and pounded out. Big dip right there. This bar wasn't flipped. The saw probably had a crummy automatic oiler, and or the oil holes weren't getting cleaned out. Okay, your bar maintenance matters. We could probably do videos on just bar maintenance. We've got some of those up there, and that's part of where you need to take the time to take your chain off and clean all this stuff out. And if you're cutting dusty wood, do it frequently, because that's your oil passage for a home light right there. Right there. That can plug up so fast, and you would think, oh well, the drive links, going by through there will tip. No, it'll just plug up right there, and the drive links will polish that smooth, and it'll be solid. So there you go, folks. There's an updated version of why I prefer a chain grinder, asterisk, because I do. But there's times where it's not practical. There's times where it makes no sense whatsoever. But for an awful lot of tasks, I'm still going to prefer the product that it puts out versus the product that I do with a hand file. You may be different.